All right. There are millions of whites, particularly white men, who are suffering and they're silenced and they are furious right now. Anti-white society inflicts endless misery on whites, particularly white males. Whites are marginalized, particularly white males, demonized, disempowered, and silenced. Millions of people marginalized, demonized, disempowered, and silenced. Every avenue to address the harm inflicted on them is denied by way of deplatforming, criminalizing, but also by way of trivializing and mocking their suffering. They're given no reprieve, and the attack is endless on their lives. It is endless, it is relentless. Many of them, as a result, feel that there is no reason to live. You remember the Sky King. He said that he would never be made a pilot because he's a white guy. Millions of white males unable to find a wife who will respect them, unable to get a job that they deserve, unable to get into the school that they've worked to get into, unable to get the promotion that they worked for, given no dignity, and forced to pretend that the reverse is true. Think of the psychological damage that does to a person. You are discriminated against. You are persecuted. It is written in law. It is written in the law of counties, states, the federal government, that persecution is legal of you and your community. It is written in the codes. It is celebrated at companies. It is celebrated at universities that you are discriminated against. It is celebrated in the media empires that you are discriminated against. And yet, you have to pretend that the reverse is true. That you are the one with privilege. That you are the one who has all of the advantages. That you are the one who needs to surrender more. You need to give up more of your culture. You need to suffer more pain. Because everything is good for you in this world. You have to pretend that. Because if you don't pretend that, you are more evil than you were when we started this conversation. You are worse than when we started the conversation. What does that do to the psychology of an individual? That could make anybody go mad. That could make anyone go insane. To see the reality, the cognitive dissonance of the reality. That it is law of the land and code of the company and the university that you can be discriminated against. And that it is celebrated in our media that that discrimination is a positive thing. And yet you have to pretend that the reverse is true. You have to pretend that it is all of the non-whites who are receiving the special privileges and the preferential treatment in every sphere of life. You have to pretend that they are the ones that are suffering because of you. And that you have to give up more because of that. What do you think that does to a person's mental state? What about a person who's already not well? What do you think that's going to do to them? Well, what it does is that whites, particularly white males, end up turning inward on themselves. And most of them commit suicide. The fastest growing rate of suicide is white males. No one is asking these questions. What could drive somebody like the shooter in New Zealand or anywhere else to do that, to commit such an atrocity? Well, it's all of what I just said, plus the fact that every single avenue to redress this harm is cut off for you. There is no media avenue for you to share the hurt that you're suffering, the pain that you're experiencing. There is no political avenue for you to enact any change or for you to work for change that will better your situation. When you get online, when you try to do the things that we're doing, when you try to spread this message, when you try to talk about the suffering that's happening for our people, that our people are experiencing, the discrimination and the persecution, the anti-whites cut off your means of funding those efforts. They cut off your efforts of getting that message out to the masses to effectuate change. So they put you in this position where you are persecuted, where you have to pretend that the reverse is true, and that your group is actually riding high, and that everyone else is suffering. And that even though you're the one who's being persecuted, even though you live in a house that's smaller and that you're renting than your parents and then your grandparents owned, and that you have a car that's cheaper and more run down, and that the non-whites who are receiving the special privileges and preferential treatments at your universities, at your work, that they have the nicer cars now, that they live in the bigger houses now. You have to pretend that they're the persecuted ones. At the same time, while you're suffering that, you are mocked and your suffering trivialized when you try to express it. You are deplatformed. Your attempts at rectifying the situation are criminalized. Your speech is criminalized. Your right to self-defense is criminalized. You isolate these people. That's what the anti-whites do. They isolate us into smaller and smaller groups where we are terrified to share our socio-political views because of the persecution that is real, despite what we have to pretend otherwise. So you cut off every means. This is what the anti-whites have done. They have cut off every single means to redress the harm that is inflicted on us. And then they mock us, and they deplatform us, and they cut off the funding every time we make an effort, anywhere we go. It is an endless cat and mouse game. And then they're going to be surprised that someone snaps. God help us that there hasn't been 1,000 more that have already snapped. God help us that next month doesn't see 1,000 more after that. How peaceful of a people have we demonstrated ourselves to be? What other people would sit so placidly, would endure so much, as to have their voices ripped out of their necks and not go wild on society? Instead, they sit in their homes, our white brothers and sisters, using more and more drugs, inflicting injuries on themselves rather than on society. No, if anything, we should be talking about how noble of a people we are, how virtuous we are, that even as lost as our people see themselves, even though every avenue to redress all of these hurts has been cut off to us by the anti-whites, rather than harm society like the rest of the races do, the majority of us, almost everyone, kills themselves rather than harm someone else. That is the reality of the kind of people we are. That we care so much for the lives of others that we would either kill ourselves, either quickly with a bullet or slow with drugs, than harm other human beings. And yet these anti-white bastards want to talk about one person here snapping off and one person there snapping off. If this were any other race, it would be thousands. And I can think of a couple races of which it would be tens of thousands. Instead, we harm ourselves. What a tragedy. A people so glorious, that cares so much for humanity, that cares so much for the tears of the other races, that cares so much for the wailings of other peoples, that thinks so much of the family members who won't be able to hug their loved ones again, that we don't turn out every single time and harm those peoples. We care more about their family members and the misery that they feel than we care about our own family members when we commit quick or slow suicide upon ourselves. That, my friends, is a glorious people. put an end to this anti-whiteism. Let us and our peaceful voices reach our people with this message of hope and love for white well-being. Don't cause any more of these atrocities. If you put us in these blackest state of depression and give us no way out, shut off every avenue of political change, of the policy change in companies and at universities, and so demonize us that polls show that nearly 100% of us are terrified to share our objections to anti-whiteism. And then you deplatform us, cut off our means of funding. You give many of our members no choice but to harm themselves for now. And those who are not so well to commit these atrocities. You hold their hands throughout the totality.